Obviously been the most difficult week in Minnesota in recent history and maybe in our entire history. Our community, especially our Black community, is hurting beyond words. Minneapolis and St. Paul are on fire. The fires still smolder in our streets. The ashes are symbolic of decades and generations of pain, of anguish, unheard. Much like we failed to hear George Floyd as he pleaded for his life as the world watched, by people sworn to protect him, his community, our state. Philando Castillo, silenced, unheard. So many other friends, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, senselessly died in our street. Their voices went unheard, and now generations of pain is manifesting itself in front of the world. And the world is watching. One of the first people I called after seeing the video was Valerie Castillo, Philando's mother. We've become friends since the killing of Philando. And for those watching today who aren't familiar, Philando died in front of his loved one and his child, and left them behind, and left behind a grieving mother who has become an advocate for justice, an advocate for reform, but more importantly, an advocate for kindness and decency. And when I talked to Valerie, she said first and foremost, seek justice, seek fairness, and reach out and show kindness. What the world saw last night was not that. What the world has witnessed since the killing of George Floyd on Monday has been a visceral pain, a community trying to understand who we are and where we go from here. I'm joined today by Attorney General Ellison, by Major General John Jensen, the Adjutant General of the Minnesota National Guard, Colonel Langer of the Minnesota State Patrol, and Commissioner John Harrington. I spoke this morning with Reverend Jackson, who, much like Valerie, said a prayer for our state, said a prayer for over those grieving, said a prayer for peace, and then also said something very important. This is the moment where we start, but every time we get to this place, we never start the process to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that commitment amongst leaders in our community, watching this happen across the United States, watching another name be added, and for those of us who are old enough, to Rodney King, to Mike Brown, and unfortunately now we've added George Floyd. The situation on the ground doesn't allow us at this time to tackle those issues. The very assets in our community, our libraries, our businesses, those nonprofits and government entities, our light rail system, are all shut down from this. We have to restore order to our society before we can start addressing the issues, before we turn back to where we should be spending our energy, making sure that justice is served swiftly, and that we learn something from what George Floyd gave on Monday. Now, I want to just be very clear, and I'm going to have the team talk about what transitioned last night when the state assumed responsibility over the security near the 3rd precinct, where the state secured critical assets, and where the plan going forward to ensure that tonight our buildings do not burn, our citizens are secure, and that space that we're going to create allows us to get back to the conversation of serving justice and making sure that we're not adding to that list of unheard names. And I want to be very clear and speak to that community. The very tools that we need to use to get control, to make sure that buildings aren't burned and the rule of law collapses, are those very institutional tools that have led to that grief and pain. I understand clearly there is no trust in many of our communities, and the differentiation between the Minneapolis Police Department that we witnessed losing trust of those they're there to serve is very difficult for people to make, for those standing up here with me. I understand that. And I will not patronize you as a white man without living those lived experiences of how very difficult that is. But I'm asking you to help us. Help us use humane way to get the streets to a place where we can restore the justice so that those that are expressing rage and anger and demanding justice are heard, not those who throw firebombs into businesses that our communities of colors have worked so hard to build back up areas that were blighted at one time and are thriving because of their entrepreneurship and their hard work. A library in an area where our children, as we know, are institutionally put behind, and the achievement gap for our communities of color is a shame on this state that we continue to admire by talking about and don't repair it. And that tool to help with that burned last night. So I want to just call out very, very clearly, as we put a presence on the street to restore order, it is to open that space to seek justice and heal what happened. I will not in any way not acknowledge that there's going to be that pain, but my first and foremost responsibility to the state of Minnesota is the safety and security of all citizens. We cannot have the looting and the recklessness that went on. We cannot have it because we can't function as a society, and I refuse to have it take away the attention of the stain that we need to be working on is what happened with those fundamental institutional racism that allows a man to be held down in broad daylight, and thank God a young person had a camera to video it, because there's not a person here or listening today that wonders how many times that camera's not there. These are tough questions. These are things that have been brewing in this country for 400 years. We have people out there putting themselves on the line to try and put out fires in our firefighters that are under attack. Those are the things I'm asking you. Help me restore that order. We will do that under state leadership and state guidance. You will hear directly from them of once that decision was made around 12:15 last night, and that first mission was executed around 3:45 at the 3rd precinct, we will see a difference. So I'm asking you, and you'll hear from them, to talk about this. I also want to think about what happens when we don't have that. People who are concerned about that police presence of an overly armed camp in their neighborhoods that is not seen in communities where children of people who look like me run to the police, others have to run from. So I understand that that's out there. But last night I got a call from a friend and a dedicated public servant. Senator Torres Ray called in her district, and it was on fire. And there weren't any police there. There weren't any firefighters. There was no social control, and her constituents were locked in their house wondering what they were going to do. That is an abject failure that cannot happen. We must restore that order to that. Senator Torres Ray has fought her whole life on these issues of inequities and making sure that people's voices are lifted up. But what she understands is none of us can lift those voices. None of us can tackle these problems if anarchy reigns on the street. I also want to address an issue, and this one is on me, and I will own it. Earlier this morning, when this mission was carried out under my direction to resecure the 3rd precinct, to do so in a manner which I am proud of how it was executed by this team, no injuries and no loss of life, a reestablishment to put the fires out for those businesses. A CNN reporter a crew was arrested by the State Patrol. A few minutes after hearing that, I was on a call with CNN President Jeff Zucker, who demanded to know what happened. I take full responsibility. There is absolutely no reason something like this should happen. Calls were made immediately. This is a very public apology to that team. It should not happen. And I want to be clear for those of you listening. I think our Minnesota's reporters know this. I am a teacher by trade, and I have spent my time as governor highlighting the need to be as transparent as possible and have the press here. I failed you last night in that. And it does not escape me that we are here on the catalyst that lit this spark by what happened with a police detainment of George Floyd, and the idea that a reporter would have been taken while another police action was in play is inexcusable. So to CNN, to the CNN team, to the journalists here, this is about having a plan, and that's what these folks are going to talk about. This is about having an aggressive approach to understanding what the community needs, to not coming in heavy-handed with them, but to create space where the story can be told. In a situation like this, even if you're clearing an area, we have got to ensure that there is a safe spot for journalism to tell the story. The issue here is trust. The community that's down there that's terrorized by this, if they see a reporter being arrested, their assumption is because something's going to happen that they don't want to be seen. And so that is unacceptable. We will continue to strive to make sure that that accessibility is maintained, that not only that, the protection and security and safety of the journalists covering this is a top priority, not because it's a nice thing to do, because it is a key component of how we fix this. Sunshine, disinfectant, and seeing what's happening has to be done. So again, I appreciate President Zucker's call. I appreciate his understanding in a situation that he was rightfully incredibly angry, and that falls squarely on me. That apology has been issued, and I think going forward to make sure it doesn't happen again. It's time for us to clean our streets. It's time for us to execute today in a way that shows respect and dignity to communities. I'm going to ask for a lot of help today of those folks who want to see it. It is my expectation that justice for the officers involved in this will be swift, that it will come in a timely manner, that it will be fair. That is what we've asked for. I have been in contact with Hennepin County Attorney, and I am confident that those very things I just said will happen. We will continue at the BCA to do a fair, a full, and a swift gathering of all of the evidence involved. But I would reiterate again, for so many of us, not all that's done in every other case where all of that evidence is gathered before, and I would ask that the swift justice be carried out. So Minnesotans, your pain is real. The chapter that's been written this week is one of our darkest chapters, and we can choose a few things. We can choose to try and get past this. We can choose to put a force out there and stop things from happening. We can hope that in the midst of COVID-19 or something else, it passes by, and we don't have to turn that mirror to look at the harsh reality of those underlying gaps, whether it be healthcare disparities, whether it be educational disparities in our communities of color, whether it be policing disparities in our community of color, whether it be wealth acquisition in our communities of color, are all very real. We pride ourselves on a state of openness. We pride ourselves on a state of being friendly. I've talked a lot about One Minnesota. That wasn't on display last night. I don't naively think everything heals and you come to the forefront and you say it'll be better. This is a community that demands and should expect more than words. They should expect results. Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and I have tried to make equity the center of everything we've done. But obviously in Minneapolis on Monday night, there wasn't a lot of equity for George Floyd. His family is probably wondering where the One Minnesota is for them. And that's on us as Minnesotans, us as the governor and the team that works with me, to put the things in order to establish order in our streets, to establish and rebuild trust in our communities, to lift those voices up to be heard, not pleading for their lives, but demanding the changes necessary so no one else is put into that position.